Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this international webinar at Believers Church Medical College and Hospital. This is our 55th webinar and also happens to be our 4th Best Talks. Best Talk stands for Believers Excellence in Science Tele-Education, and this is the 4th such talk which we accord on very good quality talks. So for this, we have a very special international speaker, and the topic for the day is preparing for life through medical education. To tell us more, to introduce the speaker, and to guide us through, we have none other than Dr. George Chandy Machitra, the Director and CEO of Believers Church Medical College and Hospital. Sir is the former Director of CMC Vellore, and he is one of the doyens of medical gastroenterology. Sir did his undergraduate from CMC Vellore, post-graduation from Ludhiana, and DM gastroenterology from CMC Vellore again, and went on to train in Australia and UK, setting up one of the best gastroenterology units in CMC Vellore, from moving on to become the medical superintendent and then the director of CMC Vellore. He has a huge experience in administration of hospitals, gastroenterology, and much more. It's a great privilege to have him as the moderator of this webinar. And let us all welcome Professor Dr. George Chandy Machitra, sir. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Jacob, for that introduction. And thank you for asking me to moderate this session. It's such a privilege for me to welcome and introduce a dear friend who joined our college in CMC Vellore 5 years after I did. Dr. Ardwin Singh graduated from Christian Medical College, Vellore, and has done remarkably well, a lot of new paradigms, a lot of lateral thinking, and he has made a success of everything that he has taken up. So I'm proud to introduce to you Dr. Ardwin Singh, who was initially deciding between a career in cardiothoracic surgery and ophthalmology when it was a successful retinal detachment repair of his left eye by Dr. Badrinath that made him decide in favor of ophthalmology. Having decided not to continue in India, he chose during the period of recuperation to decide to go to the UK to train as an ophthalmologist. During the course of his training, he did 2 fellowships, adult retinal surgery at Johns Hopkins and Mooresfield Eye Hospital, and also worked at the pediatric retinal surgery at Harvard. After his Moorefield fellowship, he returned to India for 6 months, and that is where he established the L.V. Prasad Eye Institute in Hyderabad and was its founder for Vitreoretinal Service, a remarkable achievement. And L.V. Prasad is today one of the best eye hospitals in India. During his 21 years as a consultant vitreoretinal surgeon, Ardwin operated on complex diabetics, premature babies with retinopathy or prematurity. As is often customary in the UK, Ardwin did his share of phacoemulsifications, glaucoma surgery, and surgery for strabismus in children. It was in 2008 that there was a change in paradigm as well, and he completed his master's in business administration from the Strathclyde Business School in Glasgow. He served for 8 years on medical and healthcare products regulatory agency in the UK and on the board of BMJ Publishing Group. Being involved in several charities connected with visual impairment, Ardwin has done charitable work in India, Libya, and China. And being a person with a lot of passion for teaching, he has also been the senior examiner with the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow and the International Council of Ophthalmology. Ardwin was fortunate to marry his classmate, Deepa Venkatesan, who was an anesthesiologist and has just retired. When Ardwin is not advising, mentoring, and inspiring healthcare startups worldwide, He indulges in his passion for calligraphy and flies single engine aircrafts. What more can one achieve during one's own lifetime? And today he is here to deliver a best talk, teaching us, telling the next generation how we should look at life in general, and especially with planning their own future. Thank you so much, Dr. Arvind Singh, for accepting our invitation. I'm so sure your two children were blessed by your insights and your visionary zeal, and grateful to you for giving us this opportunity to listen to you. Over to Dr. Arvind Singh.
Thank you very much, Dr. George Chandy, Jacob, ladies and gentlemen. I feel privileged to be here this morning with the morning our time, afternoon, evening your time with you to share with you some of the lessons that I learned at Christian Medical College, Vellore during my undergraduate years and how they have helped me cope with the situation and challenges in life. I've always looked upon myself as a healer. And when I looked at your mission of Believers Church Medical College, it says to be a world class of scholarship in art and science of healing, exhibiting professionalism, excellence, compassion, and a holistic, Christ centered understanding of healing. These are exactly the principles that inspired me when I arrived at Vellore. And I'm delighted that Dr. George Chandy has inculcated those in your thinking and belief. I believe that all of you who are privileged enough to study medicine at this medical college enjoy the same privileges that I did when I went through my education. And I realized quite early on, after leaving Vellore, that a lot of situations that we face in life, a lot of events that occur, we can deal with them very well because of the medical education that we received. And I'm convinced that, even at the risk of sounding biased, that undergraduate medical education remains the best training for life. And this morning, by sharing my experiences both during and after my time in Vellore, I expect to persuade you to feel the same. Now, one of the people who influenced me when I was there, and I will come to it later on as to why and the traditions of Vellore, was Dr. George Chandy. He was 4 years senior to me when I joined Vellore. I know what you're going to say. He looks a lot younger and wiser than me, but that's not my fault. But believe me, I have always considered myself to be a healer and not someone who can administer medicine or dish out treatment. Now, let's start with a story. I worked in a hospital, which was a new hospital set up by the government of United Kingdom as a waiting list initiative hospital. And what we did was we did cataract surgery on a large number of patients. The patients were picked up by a car from their houses because the hospital is in a slightly distant location. We would do the surgery and the patients would be dropped back. One day, I had about 12 or 14 patients who had been picked up. They arrived at the hospital. And in the evening, after they had all been taken home, I saw the driver, Mary. She had a red rose in her hand. And I was intrigued. So I asked Mary, I said, how did you get this rose? Oh, she said, oh, Mrs. McLeod, your patient from this morning, when I dropped her home, she gave me this rose from her garden. And I was a little peeved at that moment. I thought, I've done all the surgery. I've made the patient see, and the rose has gone to this driver. All she did was drive the people from their house to the hospital, about an hour drive and a drive back. So I told Mary, I'll take you for a cup of coffee next day and speak to you. And Mary said, fine. And then the story emerged that when Mary had picked up this lady who was in her 80s, the lady was quite anxious. So she asked Mary, Mary said, what keeps you so anxious? She said, oh, about the operation. So who's going to do your operation? And she said, oh, Arvind Singh is going to do the operation. Oh, Mary said, oh, he's a very nice man. He's a wonderful surgeon. You'll not feel any pain. You'll be able to see very well. He'll reassure you. You can ask him any questions you want. And this lady arrived for surgery. I was not aware of all this. So I explained things to her. I consented her and I did the operation. And when all these ladies, 6 of them, were being driven back home in the same van, this lady turned to Mary and said, you know, everything you said was correct. I was not anxious. He was just like what you said. And I'm so happy that he did my operation. So when they arrived at home, she said, can you wait for a moment? And she gave Mary the rose. And then it dawned on me that I may have done the operation, but my reputation and skill was still enhanced by what Mary did. And that brought home to me the importance of leadership and teamwork. We operate in medicine, we'll always work in teams ourselves. And ultimately, particularly if you have big surgical specialties like cardiac surgery and GI surgery, even if you do an outstanding job, if a member of your team screws up, then you are the ones whose reputation suffers. And it brought home to me that every member of the team is important. And the skills of leadership are very important. What is leadership? I started reading up on it. And I looked at different definitions. People have defined it as the ability to get the best out of people. It's defined as the ability to make people do things that they can't achieve without you. But ultimately, the best definition I came across was from a lecture given by the CEO of British Airways. Leadership is what a person does when nobody is watching. These are the skills, the attributes, the personal principles a person inculcates that makes others want to emulate, admire, and follow them. Very often we refer to political leaders as leader of this party or leader of that party. None of them are leaders. They're actually politicians. To be a leader, you don't need a party. When you go to set up an institution, it's the others who identify in you in all the qualities that leadership entails, and that is why they follow you. So that first lesson came home to me, and I realized that the reason I felt that way is because while at Vellore, I saw extensive examples of leadership. Now, at the start, as a devout Hindu going to Christian medical college, and I don't know how many of you know, but Hindus believe that wherever there was a boost required in the world, God came to earth in a human form as a prophet. So any Hindu who has read his literature, has read his scriptures, will recognize the fact that Prophet Muhammad, Jesus Christ, Lord Krishna were all prophets of God, and they were all equal prophets. And Hinduism says which prophet you choose is not as important as your commitment to the prophet. So all through my 6 years at Vellore, the first year at least, I went to church every Sunday because I was worshiping my God through Jesus Christ. But what I found at Vellore strengthened my faith considerably. I found people genuinely working with a commitment to Christ in their day-to-day lives. And that was an inspirational moment for me as far as the leadership is concerned. And Vellore has a tradition of seniors stopping you in the corridor. Dr. George Chandy has done that to me, and asking you questions either about the subject that you are studying or about the subject that they are studying. And they will then proceed to teach you in a manner that you will understand and shall remain with you forever. I found this when I was in Vellore. As Dr. Chandy said, I was deciding between cardiac surgery and eye surgery. And one night at 3:00 in the morning, the phone rang and the watchman called me from my room. It was during the holidays, so there were only 2 or 3 of us in the hospital. And they said, Professor Stanley John is on the phone. And Stanley John had taken a liking to me because I was going to do cardiac surgery. And he asked me at 3:00 in the morning, what are you doing? I said, sir, I'm sleeping. He said, no, you can't sleep. I want you to read on cyanotic heart disease and see me at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning at the ward round, and I'll explain to you. I said, fine, okay. Now, Vellore, those of you know, the college and hospital are 6 kilometers apart. So at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning, I took a bus. I showed up to there because those of you that know Professor Stanley John, he commands a lot of presence and respect, and he doesn't tolerate fools gladly. He's no more, but the memories are still as strong. So he said, okay, so tell me, what are congenital cyanotic heart diseases? And I was he said, no, you always remember it as 5 T's: transposition of great vessels, tetralogy of Fallot, tricuspid atresia, total or partial anomalous pulmonary venous drainage, and persistent truncus arteriosus. Now, I don't know any ophthalmologist who, after 35 years in ophthalmology, can tell you 5 congenital cyanotic heart diseases. This, to me, was the teaching and inspirational leadership of Stanley John, which I encountered at an early stage of my career in medical education. And I think that is the kind of leadership that inspired me and has helped me in life. Now, from a lifetime event, it's a very small event when somebody demonstrates leadership to you in cardiac surgery, but the principles of leadership remain with you for the rest of your life. Another example where I found teaching delivered in a very compassionate and caring way was during ward rounds. Professor Fenn, who at that time was the principal, was taking grand rounds, and he was talking to this patient. Now, as you know, those that deal with the patient day to day are the junior doctors, interns, house surgeons. So those are the ones the patient sees every now and then. The professor or the director or the senior person gets seen once in a while. So during grand rounds, Professor Fenn explained to this patient exactly what surgery he was going to do. And then a few minutes later, Colin, who was 3 years senior to me, Colin John, showed up looking very smart in his white tie, jacket, and stethoscope around his neck. And the moment he arrived at the bed, the patient straight away greeted him very warmly and did a namaskaram to him while Fenn was taking the lecture. So it obviously became very clear in the patient's eyes, the most important person was this final year medical student, this Colin John. So at the end, when they finished with the explanation, Fenn said, "I will do your operation tomorrow." So the patient looked at Dr. Fenn and in fluent Tamil said, "Sir, you can do the operation, but can Dr. Colin John supervise?" Now, at that particular point, anybody would have felt threatened by this youngster getting the respect. But Dr. Fenn turned to the patient and said, "Of course, it'll be very reassuring to have Dr. Colin John in theater with me." And we moved on. And I thought to myself, if you're really confident of your craft, and if you really believe in yourself, you'll not feel threatened by anybody. Because anybody younger than you who arrives there cannot take away from you your experience. And yet we find in real life, people appoint someone, recruit someone, and that person is very bright and they feel really threatened. I think institutions are set up by great leaders by hiring people who are at least as good or brighter than them. And that is how they succeed. And this also came into my thinking at that time. Furthermore, I found the honesty and integrity in looking at a career in medicine or surgery is also very important. I remember during one of my rounds, one of the rounds I was attending, there had been a case done before, and there was some problem during the operation. And another extremely competent gentleman, Dr. Keith Gammon, was second year MS student. And Dr. Fenn looked at him and said, "So exactly what happened, Keith?" And while explaining the procedure, he said, "Sir, the diaphragm was stuck to the liver. And during the separation, I got the plane wrong and made a nick in the diaphragm." Fenn said, "Fine." And they just moved on. And it struck me, in the number of times you come across in life where people have made a mistake and have tried to conceal it, and that makes the situation worse. It is you come across in politics, come across in management. Whereas I found that a straight talking identification of the problem helps others rectify it. That's another thing I learned during my medical education. When a complication occurs, we have meetings, we have mortality, morbidity conferences where things are discussed honestly and above board. Whereas in the real life, after we leave medicine, very often inquiries have to be set up to inquire into things. And these don't always come up with the right result. And everybody works to try and conceal their mistake. A lesson to me in decision making, which I saw and hadn't reflected how much evidence-based decision making is there in medicine. I was on an aeroplane going to the US, and the gentleman sitting next to me was a senior executive in the city of London. And he looked at me and he said, "Why don't more doctors go in investment and in city?" And I said, "Well, what would a doctor do there?" And he explained to me, he said, "Listen, when we set up a company for mergers and acquisition, we gather information, we take weeks to look at the strong case, then we take the decision to manage. And if it fails, nobody takes responsibility. But you guys do this every time a patient walks into your clinic. You examine the patient, you gather evidence, you make a diagnosis, you do it in a matter of minutes. And when the result comes out, if things are not gone according to your choosing, you take full responsibility for it." That's another thing I learned from medicine, that we in medical world always investigate a situation thoroughly. We do so with an open mind, even though we've been told to pay attention to a patient from the time he or she walks into the clinic. We don't come to a final decision. We put that aside in our brain, then we examine the patient, then we investigate, and you come to a very informed decision. That is not something that is very common in the world, but evidence-based thinking is what we learn in medicine. Whatever we do after that, whether we pursue a career in medicine or not, such education is very useful to us in life. We take full responsibility for our success and failures. Another quality that I found we are taught and we develop in a medical school is empathy. Imagine a patient coming to tell you, "I've got a headache." And you look at him and say, "That's your problem. I've also got a headache." We never do that. You start by empathizing with the patient. Now, let's not forget, patients don't come to the hospital for a picnic. Everybody who comes to the hospital comes looking for help because they are not well. And our job as clinicians, we are taught, is to meet the patient's expectations. Not to give the most modern treatment, not to give the most expensive treatment, not to give a treatment which may benefit us. We give the patient the treatment to make them feel better. That's why I said, and your mission statement indicates, that we have to look upon ourselves as healers. And healing is something that you practice in combination with your empathy, identifying the problem, and dispensing treatment, ultimately to make the patient feel better. You can distribute exactly the same treatment to 5 different people, but they will respond differently depending upon how they feel about the way the treatment has been given. One of the very, very important thing I found was, and I've encountered most of it after leaving Vellore, somebody is asked to give a lecture, and they will start by saying, "Oh, this is not, I've been given 25 minutes to cover this topic. It's a huge topic. How can anybody cover it?" That is almost an admission of failure at the start. We never do this in medicine. A patient walks in, you don't turn around and say, hold on, your problem is too complex. I really have 2 minutes. You can get out of my room after that." We give the patient what is due. And one of the things that helps us is when we go to lecture after that, as Einstein said, if you can explain something to a 10-year-old, then you know your stuff. Otherwise, you don't. So during the course of our medical career, we identify with the desire to find a solution. Patient comes with a problem, we look at it and we give all that it takes, sometimes staying very late after hours because the patient needs it. There are a few other stories which have made me value these real life situations, but in a medical context. I once I like drawing. I used to do very good drawings, and we had a anatomy teacher called Dr. Harsha. Dr. Harsha's drawings were legendary. Nobody ever took them out of the room, and he valued them very highly. One day I got a phone call from anatomy department. I was told to come and see Dr. Harsha, and I went to see Dr. Harsha. And he looked at me and he said, can I borrow some of your drawings? The drawings were actually stored in the anatomy department. He could have just looked at them if he wanted. And I said, yes, sir, what is the problem? He said, oh, somebody has borrowed my drawings and not returned them. I didn't want to touch your drawings without asking you. And I thought that was such a genuine recognition and such courtesy shown to me. I was a nobody. I was just a third year medical student, and he was one of the senior most anatomies in the country. And as a senior anatomist, he made me feel the best anatomy student in the world. He asked for my permission. And that's where I learned the skill that no matter how much junior a person you're dealing with, treat him with respect. One of the things I learned at school was that in any society or educational community, if the juniors treat seniors as seniors, but if seniors treat juniors as equals, it leads to very harmonious relationship. And I found that at Vellore. Every single person I came across who was senior to me treated me with respect. So what effect does it have on me? It means that going through life, any team, any member, any situation, I learn to treat my juniors with respect. It takes a lot of person with a tremendous self-confidence to recognize that the junior is also very good at what he does. And I found that in organizing teams and my operating theater, as I had seen happen in Vellore. I always tell my trainees that when you approach somebody, you approach with the feeling that with the belief that the other person is at least as good at their job as you are at your own. Never compare. And that is the way I learned at Vellore. And that is the way I treated people in my operating theater, my operating department technician, the nurses, the people who did sterilizing of my instruments. At the end of the day, every single one of them is doing their job. I've come across colleagues who have run nurses into the ground for making a mistake. One of my colleagues once really ripped a nurse apart for doing the operation, was not being familiar with the operation, which she had not even seen. This guy was trying to show off that he had the skill to do this complicated operation. And even though he was when I heard about it, I went up to him and I said, look, that was the wrong thing to do. That girl has been doing her job a lot longer than you've been doing your job. But what I learned in Vellore was that people respected you for what you are. One of the stories that I have of this kind of respect is it was very common in Vellore for students to give blood for cardiac surgery. Now, those days, we were using disc oxygenators, which required 2 or 3 pints of units of blood just to prime the device before you started operating. And then there was blood loss. So one of the MCH candidates was on a blood duty. He had to go to college, start looking around for students who will donate blood. And when you donated blood, you got you got a cup of coffee and a cake. And you also got a chance to watch the operation for which you had donated blood if you liked or if you were interested in it and you're not particularly squeamish. So I had a chance to do that several times. And then when I finished, and I was an intern posted in A&E, or casualty as we called it, and I had a patient who was bleeding. So I phoned the theater, and the story was told to me by one of the MCH candidates who was a Vellore graduate, but there were other MCH candidates who had come from other centers. And in the theater, the phone rang outside. We had a beautiful new theater complex. There were telephones outside every theater door in the anesthetic room. And Stanley John was doing an aortic valve replacement. He was suturing in a valve. And he looked up and he said, well, who was that? And this MCH trainee, trained, I'm sure, in a North Indian hospital where there's a huge hierarchy, said, don't worry, sir. I've told him not to. He said, no, who was on the phone? He said, sir, I've told them not to disturb you. He said, I don't want to know who was on the phone. There was an intern called Singh from Casualty. Yes, what did he want? Stanley John asked. He said, sir, his patient is bleeding. His patient is B positive. And he said, sir, you are B positive. Is there any way you could give blood? And Stanley John, without blinking, told the patient, well, I'll just put in the valve. I'll just finish suturing in 10 minutes. Then I'll hand it over to John Perry to close up, and I'll go to the blood bank and give blood. And Stanley John did. Now, I've discussed this story with several of my friends after that, and I don't know another hospital in the world where a lowly intern can get the chief of cardiac surgery to go to blood bank and give a blood for his poor, non-paying bleeding patient. And that showed me not just the qualities of leadership, it showed me his level of skill and training, his Christian commitment, and his care for the patient, any patient. That was actually my patient, was not even his patient. So these are the values that I found, I learned in Vellore, which have helped me throughout life. They are not medically exclusive. Whatever situation you encounter in life, these values and these practices and this training lasts and is very useful to it. I've also found compassion that and care exhibited by people who were suffering. Some of the most inspirational patients are those that are, by our standard, quite badly off. Either a blind patient or a person who's going blind. And I have found during my posting in Shell as an undergraduate ophthalmic patient, and subsequently in my career as an ophthalmologist, some of the most positive people that you meet in life are either visually impaired or totally blind. And what amazes you, that they are accomplishing and dealing with situations far more challenging than any of us. And yet they are doing so with much greater joy and happiness just for being alive. This happened to me when, as Dr. Chandy said, I suffered a retinal detachment. I was a third year medical student. I was going through my ophthalmology practice, ophthalmology posting, and I arrived at Shell Hospital. Those days, all patients were examined in a totally dark room. So it was a fairly disturbing situation to start off with. Dr. Anna Thomas brought me in, examined me, and said, no, you've got a serious retinal problem. You've got to go to Madras and be operated by Dr. Badrinath, and I will make arrangement. And she gave me a letter. And of course, I subsequently steamed open the sealed letter to see exactly what was in it and quietly sealed it carefully. But as I left the hospital, I was a third year medical student. I was totally lost. Having done half my ophthalmology posting, I knew the seriousness of what I had just been told. And as I walked out, one of my fellow students, who was 3 years senior to me, said, yes, I know what has happened. Where are you going now? I said, I'm going to the hostel. He said, I'll take you. And on his scooter, he gave me a lift to my hostel and stayed behind long enough to explain to me what everything I had been told, its significance. And I realized that if I have to pursue medicine and learn from my experience. That is the kind of compassion and empathy I should show a fellow human being, even though I'm not involved in dispensing therapy or healing to them. And these are all the valuable lessons that my medical education provided me. There are other things that one learns to deal with, such as negotiation. As a student body, which is very active in Vellore, I remember the general secretary was one Dr. George Chandy, and the deftness with which he dealt with various difficult personalities. Every institution has difficult personalities, and still carry out his duties while continuing his medical education was a lesson to me that no matter how difficult the situation, you can always find a solution. But it's entirely dependent on you, how you approach people and address the situation. As I've been countless times told, and I've discovered for myself, we don't have control on what is happening around us, but we do have 100% control on how we react to it. And I think that is a very important lesson. And wherever I looked during my medical education, I found everybody reacting to the situations, whether they were difficult cases, whether they were administrative hassles, whether they felt they had been mistreated by the institution, they always reacted to it with compassion, care, and understanding from the other side of the equation. So, even when it comes to negotiation, your experience in the medical system, particularly in an institution like you are and like I was privileged to be, is something that will last you a lifetime. So, summarizing the skills that we learn but do not appreciate in a medical environment, medical school environment, but help us in life, like decision making, attention to detail, open mindedness, evidence based thinking, taking full responsibility for one's action, team building, and leadership is something that you will learn in medical school or have already learned, which will last you a lifetime and will often save you from a badly managed situation by people who may not have gone through a medical education, certainly not as privileged as you and I have had a chance to. So, looking forward, let me assure you that guided by the knowledge you have acquired, and inspired by your teachers, and sustained by your faith, as you go forward in life to minister health to those that need and to make the world a better place, you carry with you my best wishes, my highest hopes, and above all, my prayers. And may God be with you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Arvind, for that absolutely fantastic presentation, telling us snippets of your life, and to thank you for teaching us from your life experiences. Um, we would have loved to keep listening to all those stories, some of them which we have forgotten, but it was good to hear so much. But can I ask you a few questions? Questions that
Sure.
have come up, things that we want to know a little more about. There are mainly four areas that we'd like to request you to quickly address. One is your thoughts on the role of artificial intelligence in medicine, and I know you're doing a lot of that. Second is the role of information technology in healthcare and how you've dealt with it, and I know you've done quite a lot. And the third is how you think from your UK experience we can learn how we can, in believers, reach out to people within the healing ministry, that how can we do better?
Okay, I'll go one by one. First of all, artificial intelligence. I think the biggest advantage of, I'm at the moment working on AI in interpretation of diabetic retinal images. We know that Google has done it, but what Google has done is look at the interpretation of images taking on 30, 40,000 pound clinic machines. These machines are taken to the community. What we are developing is a handheld camera that can be used out in the community. In our view, it should cost less than $100. And our algorithms that the company in Bangalore is writing for us are algorithms which will work on these low cost images. The biggest advantage of artificial intelligence is that it can process large amount of data and arrive on evidence based protocols and algorithms that we can use in our systems to assist a diagnosis rather than to be autonomously independent. I mean, there is a lot to be said for both IT and AI in medicine. We've been doing things in the same way for 5,000 years. Charaka and Shuchuta. When an IT person comes to us and says, I'll tell you a better way of doing it, he's talking absolute rubbish. What an IT person should do is help us do our processes in a more efficient way. When I was advising the Tata Group, the CEO of Tata Consultancy Services said, why don't you go with my team to Shankar Netralaya? And the project is, we have spent crores on it, but it is not getting anywhere, and you come back. I said, I'll tell you the problem is, when an IT person goes to a person, if I treated patients the way an IT person does, patient will come to me and I will tell him, look, you have 3 minutes to tell me your signs, symptoms, surface marking, radiation of your headache, and then we'll sign an agreement to treat you. Now, you don't understand half the terms, but you come up with something. And then we sign an agreement. And 2 weeks later, the patient comes back and says, Doctor, I was talking to my mother. I used to get similar headaches when I was 5 years old. You say, no, 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 no. We have defined the protocol. We are going to treat you according to that. We can't change the specifications now. And that is and the moment I told this to the CEO, he said, no, no, we'll change everything. Go and speak to people. And subsequently, after 2 years of effort, the Shankar Netralaya implementation was not only successful, but it got a NASCOM award for it. So one of the big advantages we have is that we should be able to explain to the IT people in their language what we want from them. Very often, we haven't defined for ourselves what we are looking for. So the IT person can't solve the problem. On the other hand, an IT person that we are dealing with must come to the conclusion that we want to undertake the same process, but with the help of IT. I'm not going to change my practice for some young upstart who's an IT expert, but who knows nothing about medicine. So I think if we were able to interface better, IT has a very important role to play in in our practice of medicine. And AI allows us to compress in a much shorter time period a large amount of data based on which we can draw conclusions and change our processes and behavior. As for UK and India, one of the advantages that we have, or the similarities, that in UK it's a national health service which is federally funded, and the treatment and everything is free at the point of delivery. Now, I genuinely believe, and most people here believe, that that model is not sustainable in the long term. We have to find a way of generating funds which are reflective of the complexity of the treatment that we are delivering. Now, money is not the key driver. It's been found that if you look at doctors or if you look at people working, what drives a person, the money is not the number one criteria. In most institutions, such as where you are studying, or your institution, George, The incentive comes from providing a good clinical environment for the clinician. He should have what he needs to administer healing well. He should be able to share his findings by attending conferences. And I think that is something that a lot of institutions in India don't do. But I think the incentive, people always mistake that as money. Money is not the key driver. But one of the advantages we have in the health system is nobody pays for it. But the converse of that is, as a result of which, whatever we do doesn't get valued. Now, I feel that in the end, it is the judgment about either the value of the care or the value of the person. If you think you've liked my lecture or you've enjoyed my lecture, that is all credit to Jacob Jesuran, who decided that I should be invited to speak. So I think all credit to what you feel you've got out of this lecture rests with him, because he identified me as the person who should speak. Of course, if I had screwed up, I would have taken full responsibility for it. But I believe that the biggest advantage we have, or the similarity between UK and US, is that we should value people and make it possible for them to work in a good and happy environment. We don't have that very often in the NHS, but I know the institutions that are succeeding in India in the non-government sector are succeeding because they really value their people and give them the freedom to practice high quality medicine, which is the mission you set for yourself when you establish the institution.
Thank you, Arvind. Those were very, very wise words, wise thoughts. You know, we are at the moment developing, with the help of CMC, we are developing our own HIS, which we hope, and we've tried to do what you just said, that we ask the right questions so that the IT professional can get us the right model so that we can use it. But I know that you were instrumental in helping the Tatas to come up with good modules, isn't it?
Yes.
So that will be, you know, we'll try to hear more from you to try and see that we learn from your experience. I wanted to ask you, how is it that you still speak Indian English?
I, I think my accent is something that I clung to. I'll give you a story of Dr. Shanta Joseph, who was, I think, a few years senior to you.
That's right.
And she just retired or a few years ago, retired as a consultant hematologist, clinical director, medical director of a hospital and everything. And Shanta gives the story that when she first arrived in the UK, Sir John somebody or the other was the president of the Royal College of Pathologists. And Shanta was introduced to him at some big time meeting. And he looked at Shanta and said, Dr. Joseph, if I may say so, you speak very good English. And Shanta looked at him, Sir Peter, if I may say so, so do you. And it stunned everybody, because I think one of the things that we have learned is our own skills, our own knowledge, our culture is 5,000 years old. So I don't think we should let a much more recent culture help us change our accent. I'm so proud of it, and I'm so glad. I know people go abroad for 6 months and come back with a foreign accent. I had a classmate in school. His name was Sham Kapoor. He went to US for 6 weeks and came back as Sam Cooper. So I think to respect your values is very important.
There are two questions from our medical students.
Yes.
One is, can you help me with thoughts on how to cope with the stress that I have in medical school? And you probably know that in India, there is a fair percentage, 10 to 20% of students who are under a lot of stress. They go through, as you know, this training program, 1 or 2 years to do the NEET exam. And then once you get in, it is very stressful. The second question that they have is, can you help me set goals for the future as I plan my medical education? After my medical education, you seem to have done extremely well, and you're a multifaceted personality. You've done so much in so many different ways. How do I set goals for myself for the future?
First, managing stress. Medical education is about the most stressful system of education, not because you have a lot to learn, which is the case, but you're dealing with people who themselves are disadvantaged by being unwell. And that often adds to the stress. I feel that you have to learn to handle your stress by continuously focusing on why you are doing what you're doing. We all go through life in moments of stress, but people also suggest that if we are much more reflective, meditation, trying to share the stress with somebody is a much better way of dealing with it. The situation that, like I said before, we cannot change what is happening around us, but we have 100% control on our reaction to it. And very often, stress comes from reacting to a situation in a manner that is not best either for us or for somebody else. I found it very helpful right from my first year to go to the hospital. And I was wandering around cardiac theater or cath lab when I was still doing anatomy physiology. And the reason and I was the only person in my batch doing it. And I found the reason was I could see what I am heading for. In medicine, you have to create your own intermediate waypoints that we would call in flying and drive towards them. Otherwise, anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, pharmacology, all these things become pointless if we don't see where they fit in. So, what I was doing was attending theater with Dr. Fenn and others just as a first year, second year medical student. So, I could see why I was learning what I was learning. So, the stress can be reduced significantly if we have something wonderful to work towards. And those are things which, whether it's in our personal relationship, if we know what we want, then we can get it. I mean, if you look around you, the teachers that you have are the only people in this world who have the power to get you from where you are now to actually achieving your dream. They are there as guides, but they also rely on you for knowing what your dream is. And I think it's always a good idea to search yourself to see what will make me happy. When I was working every year, I'd get about 4 or 5 students in their school leaving year who would come as a placement for me to see whether they should pursue a career in medicine, just to see what it's like. And I used to tell all of them, imagine yourself 10 years from now, what will get you out of bed in the morning. It should be something enjoyable. It should be something you look forward to. And therefore, even in summer holidays, I stayed behind and worked in cardiac surgery, sleeping on the room next to the ICU, which was all out of choice. I could have gone home to my parents who were abroad, but I just feel that you have to create your own waypoints and work towards the next waypoint in the full knowledge that you have chosen it. Nobody is forcing it on you. You choose to have a good life. Just like getting out of bed in the morning, they say you should do 3 things when you get out in the morning. Get up in the Number one, to move your limbs and thank God that you're still alive. You have another day to look forward to. Number two, to be grateful for something. Even if you think of 3 things that you're grateful with, I still do this. And number three, then look at your social media, your Facebook page or WhatsApp or whatever it is, after you've done these 2 things. So you start with an advantage. I still do it. Sometimes I'm just grateful that I'm waking up in a warm bed, which a lot of people are not in this world. I think all of us are very fortunate that we have an opportunity to be in a stimulating environment such as a medical college. And I think we should create our own little milestones for happiness.
And when there are 2 other questions from the medical students, what
Yes.
is the one factor which drives you in what you do? That's the first question. The second is, sir, what exactly is Eternity Inc.? What made you shift gears from ophthalmology?
Okay. The first question is what drives me on? I think it's, if you look at everybody else in the world, you find the only person who is trusted and privileged to fix another human being from the inside is a doctor. We've been given that privilege. You know, the number of people who can assault somebody else or slap them or murder them is very common, but nobody else trusts another human being to actually fix them from the inside, whether surgically or medically. We have been given that trust, and and it's a unique privilege. I just always like to feel special compared to everybody else. Even people who are probably more successful than me, I look around and say, well, how many lives has he saved? I mean, I must say, I've never saved a life. I'm just an eye doctor. But if I look at it and saying, you know, this guy might have been very successful, how many people's vision has he saved? So I think what makes me happy to get up in the morning and go to work is the desire to help another human being. And I'd like to believe like nobody else can. Eternity is a company I set up. If you want to do any project, it's much easier to have your own company. And I got advice from this friend of mine who is on to his third company, and he has sold each company. And he said he has taken common names but uncommon spelling. His first company was Slipstream, XLIPS, Slipstream. Second company was Glimpse, GLIIMPSE. Now, those of you who are familiar with Apple iPhones, it's got a huge health component to it. There's now the health apps and the health ecosystem. That is all based on this guy's company called Glimpse. Apple bought the company, and they then changed it into they incorporated into Apple. So when I was sitting next to this guy, a banker, and he told me, what do you want to do? And I explained to him about a few years ago. And he said, you know, first thing you should do is go home and buy the domain reachbeyondmedicine.com. So I've got the domain reachbeyondmedicine.com. And Eternity is just the company I set up through which I could fund my research and be an overall envelope for all my non-medical and some medical things as well.
Arvind, are you getting tired? Can we ask you a few more
No,
questions?
no, I'm enjoying my interaction, George. It's a long time since I interacted with medical students.
Okay.
And I love it.
Okay. 3 more questions and I think we'll stop.
Sure.
Which are the most challenging moments in your career? Which are the peaks in your life? Third one is, how do I handle and balance screen socialization versus real socialization?
Okay. First, the most challenging moment. If I look upon it, I think the time I really felt under pressure, this premature baby was brought to me who was likely to go blind in both eyes because he had stage 3 or stage 4 retinopathy of prematurity. At that time, nobody in UK was operating on that. The father was 21 years old. The mother was 19-year-old. They were these young kids with this baby. It's referred to me by a professor in Glasgow. And the baby was so unwell that the baby had to be brought in an incubator with an accompanying consultant, anesthetist, consultant, pediatric anesthetist, consultant, neonatologist. And the baby was brought, and we operated on both eyes, taking about 3 or 4 hours on the microscope, and put silicone oil in one eye and gas in the other eye. And the next day or 2 days later, and managed to fix. I mean, the baby will have vision. I met him recently. He's now 18 years old and he can see. And what astonished me was that 2 days later, the parents went to the newspaper and told them all our team had done. And the newspaper phoned me. And it suddenly struck me. And in my statement, I said, you know, it's much more of we must recognize the courage of the parents who decided to trust us with the eyes of their newborn baby. And that is what we should recognize. And when I was operating on that baby, I felt really, really challenged. So the newborn baby, the first baby that these youngsters had, and it involved them growing up rapidly to understand the implications. But I was very fortunate that we managed to help them. But I've been in situations where I've done a complicated operation and the patient is being left with no vision. And the patient has actually consoled me, say, Doctor, why are you worried? You've done your best. Nobody else could have done anything more. And that has comforted me a great deal. And the other things are what have been the peaks of my career, or what have been the peaks of
your life, yes.
in my life. I think I find the most exciting thing in this world is human interaction. And I'm a sucker for human interaction. I made great friends when I was in Vellore. I still have great friends. And when I meet somebody and get a chance to discuss with them, particularly people who have been successful, I seek out individuals who have been successful and get such a buzz out of it. I remember when I was doing my fellowship in Johns Hopkins, I saw a picture which said Daniel Nathans receiving the Nobel Prize for medicine and physiology in, I think it was 78 or 1978, 79, something. So I thought, who is this? They said, oh, he's the head of biochemistry. So I said, I must go and see him. So I went to see him. I arranged an appointment. I walked in through the door and he said, please sit down, doctor. So what can I do for you? I said, sir, first of all, I don't like biochemistry. I don't understand biochemistry. I'm only here because I've never shaken the hand of a Nobel laureate. He said, really? He jumped out of his chair, yelled to his secretary, Cindy, get Dr. Singh some coffee and biscuits. He's here because he thinks I'm a great guy. And I thought, what a humble man. So I try and find people who are successful and happy and engage with them. And that is something that really gives me a buzz even now. I've got a picture here hanging there, my shaking hands with President Abdul Kalam. He came to open the Bhubaneswar Eye Hospital, which is a branch of LV Prasad. I was invited there and I got a chance to engage with him. And I found him very humble, very polite, and very nice. So I seek out people who are happy and who are successful in the hope that some of it will rub off on me.
No, that was exciting. I mean, I guess part of your answer is to this third question, which is how do you balance socialization, screen versus the real one? Obviously,
I think because I think it's my age. I grew up at a time when we didn't have the social media, but I find that a genuine human to human interaction is always more satisfying. So I try and restrict my use of social media as much as I can. But every time I have a chance, I pick up the phone and speak to someone. Like I've just had, while I was talking, it pinged, and this Tata chairman who I advise has just sent me a message saying, is it possible for us to speak sometime? Every time somebody takes a big project to him, he's been the vice chairman of various Tata companies and chairman of it. He sends them to me, and his I find that interaction very exciting. For him to think whatever project it is that I can help him with, it gives me excitement. So I find human interaction we must make every effort to maintain, whoever it is. If we even if we just phone somebody and say, I just wanted to check how you are getting on, it's very exciting. And now with the time of WhatsApp, free calling, international calling, everything, we really don't have any excuse not to keep in touch with human beings. It's always more satisfying than a text message or a WhatsApp message. So I like to put it secondary to my human interaction.
and when this time it's definitely the final question, but it's from Dr. Anulekha, who was from the batch of 1994, CMC
Yes.
Vellore. She's professor of medicine here, endocrinology with us. And she has a pointed question to you. How has your faith helped you in stress? Where do you place God in your life?
I think God has an very important place in my life, and received even greater importance when I ended up in Vellore. Now, I was a devout Hindu to start with, but I got a gold medal in Sanskrit. So I've read a lot of the ancient Indian texts. And Hinduism very clearly points out the fact that, like many rivers reach the same ocean, each prophet who came to help people in the area where he came. Jesus went to Jerusalem. Prophet Muhammad went to Mecca. Lord Krishna came to Mathura. So I think these prophets have come to guide the local people towards the same God. And because I had read all this, and I had been this had been sort of inculcated in my belief. My father was very particular. I went to Ajmer, where there is a Dargah Sharif of one of the Muslim saints, and I put money there. I have a lawyer. Every time my mother's certificate is required, the local lawyer friend of ours, Donald Henderson, comes. And when I offered to pay him the fees, he said, no, just put it in the church. So every Christmas for the last 25 years we've been in this house, we've gone for midnight service. And only on two occasions have we had Christian friends staying with us. Otherwise, all of us went, and we always put the money in. I see absolutely no difference in worshiping my God through Jesus Christ or Prophet Muhammad. I mean, I've not worked in a Muslim institution, but I've studied in Vellore. So I do, when I go to church, I have exactly the same feeling that I have at a temple, because as somebody who's read the ancient text, I do believe that Jesus Christ would guide me towards my God as a prophet, as would recently I had a problem. One of my friends had done something illegal, and he wanted me to give him a character reference, one of my colleagues. So I phoned the father of one of my son's friends, who was a minister and a professor of theology, a right reverend. And I said, Graham, I need some spiritual advice. So tell your wife to put a cup of tea to the kettle on, I'll come. And I went there, and he was quite impressed. He didn't know so much about Hinduism. He said, I really love it. So I said, well, you're the only spiritual leader I could find that I could get advice. So my faith has been strengthened, but it's also been strengthened by what my patients have shown me in their lives. Some of my patients have faced challenges that I don't know if I'll ever face. I got my vision back after successful detachment repair, but there are a lot of people who go blind. So my faith, by being in medicine, has been strengthened. I mean, those of you who want to use religious language, they can say by the miracles they see happening around them every day. I mean, I find that we are blessed to have a faith. And our commitment to our faith is more important than what faith we follow. So it has strengthened me completely. Well, of course, like the strengthening started when I arrived at Vellore, because I saw everybody not just talking about Christianity, but practicing it. And that helped me a great deal. And if an institution can do that to a devout Hindu, I think it's succeeding in its mission.
Thank you so much, Ardwin, for strengthening us through your experiences, through your words, through your advice. I've written down at least 10 points for life that you have mentioned.
Oh, George. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Jacob, for setting it up. And I found it a very rewarding experience.
I hope you'll visit us, because we've got a vitreoretinal surgeon who trained in CMC and then went to UK. He joined us now. His name is Saju. I don't know whether you know him, but we've got an excellent ophthalmology department as well. And we really look forward to having you here, because you can do a best talk here once the COVID season is over.
Thank you, George. Let him know, give him my email address. I'd love to contact him. I'd love to keep in touch with him. And I'd love to visit the institution. I've only ever landed in, can you believe it? After 6 years in Vellore, I've only ever landed at Trivandrum and been driven to Nagarkoil. Otherwise, I've not been to Kerala. It's something that I've been wanting to do for a long time.
We look forward to having you with us. There's a note from one of our professors who says, what a lovable personality. Please come over, dear sir, to Believers. There's one.
I will indeed. I will indeed. I think I would love, as soon as they lift the travel restrictions, I will be in South India, the drop of a
Great.
hat.
That's wonderful. And bring people along as well.
I will. They probably don't know, but my wife always commanded more attention in Vellore than I did. I'm still catching up with her.
What a wonderful testimony of all that you have done and the way you have looked at other ways. And I'm sure it's encouraged our students that there's so much more that you can do in life. Yeah, thank you, Ardwin, for all that you shared. Over to Dr. Jacob Jayasuran.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, George Andy sir. Arvind sir, that was absolutely amazing. Myself and rest of us are sitting here totally speechless. It was really wonderful lesson for life, the whole program as such. And thank you so much, sir. Thank you for taking your time off. And you just said that the TCS chief was asking for a meeting with you, and you gave us the time. You gave us more than an hour, and you came and spoke to us. It's really a great thing that you did. Thank you so much, sir. We are extremely grateful for that. Looking forward to having you in our institution, hosting you, and also taking you to the backwaters for some fresh catch from Alleppey.
Thank you very much, Jacob. I love seafood, and that's one of the reasons why I want to visit Kerala. Also to visit your institution, but I've always wanted to go for my love of seafood, and you can rest assured I shall certainly make it a point as soon as they lift the travel restrictions. Though I was vaccinated, I got my first dose of Pfizer vaccine 2 weeks ago. So I think in the next few months the travel restrictions should lift. Thank you very much, Jacob.
Thank you so much, sir. Once again, thank you all participants for tuning in. And it's been an amazing session. Thank you all for joining us, and for all the medical students and doctors from different states across the country. May I request you to send a hi to this WhatsApp number 9894119472. 9894119472. We can give you all our updates on our international webinars. We have quite a few in the pipeline, and a lot of exciting speakers coming up to talk to us. So with that, let me sign off from Believers Church Medical College and Hospital. Have a blessed evening and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.